Out on the old trails of this country, folks remember the good bikes. The ones that carried us through sand washes, pine forests, and dusty back roads without a complaint. But every now and then, a machine rolled off the line that made riders shake their heads, rub their shins, and swear they'd never touch one again. We've already talked about the worst of the worst, twice. But the deeper you dig into off-road history, the more forgotten troublemakers you find hiding in the shadows. So today, we're opening the barn door one more time. 10 more dirt bikes that bucked, kicked, overheated, rattled themselves apart, or simply showed up to the fight with the wrong ideas at the wrong moment. Welcome to part 3. The hate list isn't finished yet. 1982, Maico 490 Alpha 1. Back in the early 80s, Maico riders still believed their bikes were the gold standard. Fast, sharp, almost untouchable. And then the Alpha 1 showed up. The moment owners rolled it off the trailer, the problems began. Frames bent after just a few weekends. Subframes cracked clean through. The company's financial troubles meant sloppy assembly, loose tolerances, and welds that looked rushed. The vibration was so fierce it could split brackets or stress a frame tube until it sighed open. Out on the trail or the track, things didn't get better. The handling was sluggish, the front end pushed wide in every corner, and the chassis simply couldn't keep up with the brutal power band Maico was known for. What used to feel like mastery now felt like fighting a wounded animal. Fans who had worshipped the brand felt betrayed. A bike once known for precision suddenly fell apart in their hands. And for many, this was the moment Maico's magic died. Today, the Alpha 1 is rare, not because it's treasured, but because so many of them broke and never came back. Collectors hunt for surviving examples as pieces of hard history, not as machines to ride. A clean, original Alpha 1 is valuable, but only to the bravest, most dedicated Maico faithful. 1997, KTM 360 SX. And if the Maico felt like a legend slipping through your fingers, the KTM 360 SX was a different kind of trouble altogether. Raw strength wrapped in sharp edges. Riders cracking the throttle for the first time quickly learned that its Keihin carb didn't like to cooperate. A slight misadjustment, a little lean spike, and suddenly the power hit like someone swung a shovel into your chest. The chassis didn't help much either. The frame was so stiff, it sent every vibration straight through the bars, and the stock suspension setup felt mismatched, as if the front and rear had never met each other. On the trail or the track, the bike exploded to life in the mid-range, yanking hard enough to pull your arms straight. High-speed sections demanded total respect. The clutch heated up, your forearm burned, and you prayed the next corner wasn't coming too fast. Folks started calling it the anti-beginner weapon, a machine that was lightning quick but rarely enjoyable. You didn't ride it for fun, you rode it because you wanted to prove something. Today, surviving 360 SXs are getting harder to find. Many were modified to death, others left to gather dust. Hardcore KTM collectors still hunt for clean examples because of how unique and notorious they are. Prices are rising, but mostly for display. Few people actually want to ride one again. 1984, Honda XR500R. If the KTM punished you with brute force, the early RFVC Honda hit you in a quieter, more frustrating way, the kind that wears you down mile after mile. On paper, the new radial valve head looked like the future, but out on real American trails, the first-generation XR500R showed its weak spots fast. The valve train was delicate, the rockers wore quicker than anyone expected, and the engine shed heat poorly. Put it into slow, technical riding, and the temperature climbed straight into the danger zone. The tall center of gravity didn't help either. The bike felt top-heavy and unsettled any time the terrain tightened up. Starting it was its own little ritual. A hard, committed kick could bring it to life, or reward you with a backfire that popped like a shotgun. And once moving, the weight made every tight corner feel like you were wrestling a stubborn mule. For a lineup famous for indestructible simplicity, this was one of the rare XRs that just wasn't dependable. It left a stain on the RFVC name until later generations finally redeemed it. Today, collectors still chase early RFVC models because of their historical value. A clean 84 XR500R commands respectable money, but only after plenty of restoration. It's a bike you display with pride. Just don't expect to ride it far. 1985, Suzuki RM250. And while Honda stumbled with heat and weight, Suzuki's misstep came from a place nobody expected. The RM250 had been a favorite through the early 80s, light, sharp, and blessed with that full floater rear suspension that riders swore felt years ahead of its time. Then 1985 rolled in, and the whole system seemed to fall apart. The new linkage was fragile, thin in all the wrong spots, and known to crack or snap without much warning. The rear section of the frame didn't help either. It flexed noticeably at higher speeds, turning big jumps and rough straights into moments of doubt. Adding to the trouble, the steel quality dipped as Suzuki tried to cut costs, leaving the bike feeling less solid than the name it carried. The result was a machine that handled unpredictably whenever the rear suspension was loaded or during a landing. A few high-profile failures even led to lawsuits, almost unheard of for an RM. To longtime fans, 1985 became the year they'd rather erase from the lineage. Today, collectors view the 1985 RM250 as a strange little chapter, valuable not for performance, but for its notorious place in Suzuki history. Clean bikes are rare, especially with the original linkage intact, and their worth comes from scarcity, not capability. 1979, Husqvarna 390WR. By the mid-70s, Suzuki and Honda had their missteps, but Husqvarna's trouble came from a far more personal place, the kind of lesson riders felt directly in their shin bones. The 390WR had been a respected machine early in its run, but those late 70s models carried a flaw that could turn a simple morning start into a small disaster. The ignition timing sat right on a razor's edge. Even a tiny deviation could send the kickstarter firing back with brutal force. And with a lightweight flywheel, the engine snapped back instantly. No hesitation, no mercy. Paired with a Bing carb that was notoriously fussy and an idle that wandered like a tired old hound, it didn't take long for riders to grow wary. On the trail, the power band shot straight upward, almost vertical, making tight turns more of a negotiation than a flow. Some owners swore the bike kicked back harder than it moved forward, half joke, half truth. Still, there's something about old Husqvarnas that pulls collectors in. Vintage two-strokes from Sweden hold their own charm, even when they carry a reputation like this one. Clean, original 390WRs are still hunted for their Scandinavian soul, though prices stay below the more beloved 250s and 430s. Beautiful pieces, yes, but approach the Kickstarter with respect. 1982, Kawasaki KDX450. And if the Husky threatened you before you even got rolling, Kawasaki's answer in the early 80s challenged you the moment the wheels touched dirt. The KDX450 looked promising on paper, a big-bore trail machine built with Kawasaki muscle, but the reality was far less friendly. Weighing in at more than 255 pounds, it carried far too much heft for serious off-road riding. The big, air-cooled torque twisted the chassis harder than it was ever designed for, and on slow hill climbs, the engine built heat fast, sometimes quicker than you could find a line to cool it down. Once moving, the handling told its own story. The front end pushed wide, the rear hopped and danced under throttle, and every little bump sent the bike lunging instead of settling. Throttle response felt abrupt, almost jerky, like the carb and cylinder weren't on speaking terms. Riders back then had a blunt nickname for it, a bike that tossed you off the seat quicker than it actually moved forward. Strong words, but earned. Today, the KDX450 sits near the bottom of collector wish lists. Prices stay modest, mostly bought by folks who want to complete a full KDX lineup. Clean examples are surprisingly rare, not because they were cherished, but because most were thrashed, broken, or heavily modified just to keep running. 1991, Husaberg FE501. And after wrestling with the heavy, overheated KDX, the early 90s Husaberg brought a different kind of frustration. One wrapped in genius, ambition, and just a little too much hand-built chaos. The FE501 looked like a revelation when it first appeared. Lightweight, sharp geometry, and a monster single-cylinder that promised to outrun nearly anything in its class. But beneath that promise were cracks you couldn't ignore. The crankshafts were known to fail, stators had a habit of dying without warning, and the oiling system simply didn't keep the big engine as healthy as it needed to be. With that massive piston firing away, the vibration was fierce, enough to loosen bolts and rattle a rider's confidence. Starting it was another ordeal. Cold mornings were tough, but a hot restart? That could test a man's patience. And with all that power stuffed into an early chassis that wasn't quite dialed in yet, the bike felt like it was always 2 steps ahead of its own engineering. Most riders summed it up with a simple line: great to look at, miserable to ride. But collectors, especially in Europe, they love these early blue and gold machines. Original, unmodified FE501s are nearly extinct. Most were rebuilt, blown up, or heavily altered. Prices have climbed fast over the last 5 years, driven by rarity and the bike's place in off-road history. 2003, GasGas EC300. And while the early Husaberg tested your patience with vibration and hot starts, the early 2000s GasGas brought a different kind of misery. One powered not by engine heat or brute force, but by electricity that seemed determined to fail. The 2003 EC300 looked good on the surface, light, lively, and built for tight woods riding. But the moment owners started putting real miles on them, the weak spots showed up fast. Stators burned out with alarming regularity. The wiring harness looked like it had been routed during a lunch break, leading to shorts, melted sections, and mystery faults. Even the carb made life difficult, overflowing at random and refusing to hold consistent jetting. Out on the trail, all of that added up to a machine you simply couldn't trust. Some riders said the bike stalled more often than it ran. Lights flickered or died. The speedometer quit when it felt like it, and every ride carried a little sense of dread. What's going to fail this time? By the mid-2000s, many riders agreed. This was the most cursed GasGas of its era. Collectors haven't been kind to it either. Values stay modest because restoring the electrical system is a real headache. Still, a bone-stock, low-hour example has a small niche following. Prices remain steady, but nowhere near the climb seen in early Husabergs. 1980, Yamaha TT500 Black Edition. After dealing with the electrical chaos of the GasGas, stepping onto the 1980 TT500 Black Edition brought you back to a different era, one where the battle wasn't with wiring harnesses or stators, but with sheer, stubborn weight. The TT500 had been a beloved workhorse in its prime, but this late Black Edition carried more bulk than any rider wanted. The mass sat high and awkward, the centralization poor, and every pound made itself known the moment the trail tightened up. Brakes felt weak compared to modern standards, and the stiff suspension only made the bike more unforgiving on rough ground. On single track, it was a handful. Downhill sections in particular felt like wrestling a runaway appliance. And even though Yamaha had years to refine the starting routine, the big 4-stroke could still rob you of breath or dignity when the Kickstarter kicked back or the engine simply refused to light. Among longtime Yamaha fans, this model earned a reputation as one of the brand's least balanced off-road machines. Strong heart, wrong body. But collectors see the TT500 line differently today. As the entire series climbs in value, the Black Edition rises with it, less for its capability, more for its place in the family tree. A clean, matching numbers bike is always hunted, even if nobody's thrilled to ride it on a tight trail anymore. 1999, ATK 700 Intimidator. And after manhandling the heavy TT500, our trail ends with a machine that didn't just challenge riders, it scared them. The 1999 ATK 700 Intimidator was built with one idea in mind: make the biggest, wildest two-stroke ever sold to the public. And on that front, it delivered. Maybe a little too well. The vibration alone was legendary. The massive single shook so violently that the chassis simply couldn't keep up. Welds loosened, brackets cracked, and long rides felt like holding onto a paint mixer. The power delivery wasn't smooth or usable. It came on in a raw, violent rush that made the carb nearly impossible to tune. Many owners complained the engine would die mid-rev, just when they needed it most. On the trail, it was chaos. Wheel spin everywhere, steering that felt one step behind the engine. And on tight woods or narrow switchbacks, riders didn't handle the bike. They survived it. Most people agreed. It was so powerful that nobody actually wanted to ride it regularly. But as a collector piece, that's a different story. The Intimidator is hunted precisely because it's outrageous. Few were made, fewer survived, and clean examples command high prices today. It's a showpiece, a conversation starter, not something you take into real dirt unless you're feeling brave or foolish. Some machines earned their place in history by winning races. Others, well, they earned it by reminding us what not to build. Every bike in this list had potential, and every one of them missed the mark in its own unforgettable way. Too heavy, too wild, too fragile, or just too far ahead of the engineering that supported it. Yet decades later, they still draw us in. Not because they were great to ride, but because they were part of an era when dirt bikes were bold, risky, and unapologetically imperfect. If you've ever owned one, fought one, or swore you'd never touch one again, I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below, hit like if this brought back a memory, and don't forget to subscribe for part 4, if you're brave enough.